Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to continue covering the games from the first Croatian league. In round 7 I faced a very strong international master, 2400 Šale Srđan, and he plays several different move orders of the Reti, King's Indian attack, English type systems. I've been preparing for him and I found one interesting game that actually influenced what I did in the late opening. And I'm going to show you what happened. It was a very interesting game. Probably the most complicated middle game I ever had, and I was really struggling to understand it. There was so much going on. It was very tough to understand everything. Okay, so knight of 3, d5, g3, knight of 6, bishop g2, c6. I'm playing my normal setup. This is solid, and I don't want to give him too much play with e4 or c4. c4 more probably because it's a King's Indian attack. Castles, bishop f5, pawn to d3, pawn to e6, normal King's Indian attack stuff. Now he could opt for knight h4 variations here, but I don't think that would be as good because I can play bishop g4 and then h3 and then bishop h5, queen e1. This is a normal variation, but g4 wouldn't work here because his knight is attacked on h4, so that would be complicated. So he went for c4, which is normal. h6. I don't want to allow knight h4 in these positions because he gets to open up the center with cd. Bishop to e3, and this move is kind of rare, and I was preparing for that. So basically he wants to put pressure on b7 and a7, making it very hard for me to defend everything. So what I have to do now, in anticipation of queen b3, is I have to develop my knight to d7 to give my queen some options. And after queen b3 I have 3 moves. I can play queen c7, queen c8, or queen b8. All 3 are fine. The fact is that I cannot play rook b8, which I would normally like to play, and I cannot play queen b6, which is a normal pattern in these positions, because one loses the queen, one loses the a7 pawn, and then the b7 pawn. So I went for queen b8. The idea behind queen b8 is threefold, twofold actually. Firstly, defends the pawn. Threefold. Secondly, gets away from the c-file in the event of cd, if I want to take with the c-pawn. Rook c1 is not a tempo move. And also in the event of bishop to f4, I can play bishop to d6 once the b7 pawn has been sufficiently defended, and I can challenge the bishop on f4. So queen b8 made a lot of sense to me. All 3 moves are fine. Okay, cd5. Now, in one of his games, his opponent took with the knight, which at first I thought was really strange. His opponent was Gajewski Gregorz, a Polish grandmaster, 2567. This game was played in 2011. And the game went bishop d4 and knight 5 to f6 and knight bd2 and bishop to e7. And then knight to c4 was played by Šale, and castles, and knight a5, which I thought was really strange. Double pressure on b7, but his opponent just went queen c7, and then bishop to c3. Knight takes obviously fails to rook to b8, and if queen takes, then the knight is hanging. So knight a5 isn't really a threat. So coming back to our game, I was prepared for knight takes d5, because he lost this game. So I wanted to replicate what his opponent did. Now I should mention that c takes is sort of passive, and we would have a symmetrical pawn structure similar to what happened in my game against Mrkonjić Nenad. E takes is the most natural move. And after e takes, bishop f4 is the problem. Of course I was preparing for this as well, but this gets quite messy. Because I now cannot play bishop to d6, I would have to play queen to c8, which means that we both lost the tempo. But arguably my queen is worse on c8 than his bishop is on f4. Obviously, if I play bishop d6, he can just take on b7. So in the end, I took with the knight. And the reason why this is a viable option is the bishop on e3. He simply cannot allow this bishop to be taken. Because if the bishop is taken, for example, knight c3, and then takes, and bishop to e7, I have a Caro-Kann/Scandinavian pawn structure with a weakness on e3, and I don't even have to play c5. Everything has been liberated, my pieces are perfect, so after knight takes d5, the bishop has to move, so that's a tempo. Bishop d4, as happened in the game he played against the Polish Grandmaster, and I played knight 5 to f6, as was played in that game. Now, in the previous games, in the previous game he played knight bd2. In my game, he played knight c3. Now, there's a slight difference. This supports e4 some more, which could be important. But it also means that the knight is putting pressure on the b5 square, which means that if I play c5, this knight is going to have some more scope. Also, it doesn't mean that the knight is. It means that the knight is not coming to c4, which means that e5 is a possibility for black, which it wasn't in the game I showed you. Because if the knight gets to c4, then what do? Advance to e4, open up the center, get rid of his d3 pawn. So after knight c3, I just continued normally, bishop to e7, rook fc1, castles, rook a b1, which I thought was a strange move. And here, of course, since the knight is not coming to c4, e5, and a tempo on the queen with bishop e6 is what you start looking at straight away. I wanted to play it immediately, so e5, the bishop drops back, bishop e6, the queen drops back, and now the point is knight d5, and if he trades, then cd5 gives me a very strong center, and it's really unclear what this bishop is doing on e3. Also, my bishops are great. Also, d4 threatens to simply win the a2 pawn. To be honest, it does open up this bishop, so I would have to be careful, but if I can win a pawn, that's a pawn. I went rook d8 first, which is a preparatory move. It still means that I can play e5 on the next move. It doesn't matter. There's not much he can do to prevent that. He went a3, which in some variations prevents bishop takes a2. Okay, so e5, bishop e3, bishop e6, queen c2, and knight d5, the same variation. Again, if he trades, I'm going to take with the c pawn, and my center is sufficiently supported by the rook, and maybe my other knight comes to b6. But he played bishop to d2, which is okay. And here I made a mistake. According to the engine, black is slightly better here. Now, engine evaluations in positions like this, for humans at my level, make no difference at all. I mean, I just could not assess who is better and why. I thought the position was very complicated but equal. There are just so many options and so many plans that assessing this was impossible for me. Now, what I was thinking he wants to do, since he played a3, is he wants to play b4, b5. Go for a minority attack, weaken my center, and then hopefully move his knight away from f3 and basically blast me away from the board on the queen side. So what I can do here, which was an almost automatic move, was a5. And now b4 is prevented, so he probably breaks through with d4. But now look at this variation. This is what I was calculating. d4, knight c3, bishop c3, and c5. And this way I'm gaining control over the center. I'm gaining control over the queen side. He should take one way or the other. If he takes on c5, then I take with the bishop and continue with b6, for example, something like this. I don't know, let's say he gets the knight into e5. I don't have to play b6, but maybe I can even get away with f5. I wasn't sure. But this thought to be sound strategically, but very unsound tactically. And I thought I was going to have issues on the queen side, and eventually I was going to be worse. Still, I can continue a5, and after d4 just play safely and probably take on d4. Taking on d4 in this position, though, isn't good because my bishop has no squares. So that was complicated. Instead, I went for a move which is simply not good. I made my bishop worse. I played bishop f6. And I immediately after playing this move, I regretted it. The reason is my bishop really does belong on the e7 square. I need to control c5. I also need to be able to challenge the bishop on e3 in the event of my knight moving away from d5. I want to be able to play bishop c5. And also it simply allows b4. So I should have done something about that. But my idea was knight c3, bishop c3, and queen to d6, which is not a good idea. Queen d6 is not a good move. It doesn't make my queen any better. I wanted to break through with e4 at some point, but queen d6 is just too slow. I should have played bishop d5 simply. And if he plays e4, I'm very happy, because that means his bishop is blocked. My bishop drops back to e6, controls h3. And if he plays bishop to h3, then I can simply take on f3, and d3 is a permanent weakness. For example, like this. And now knight b6, knight d5, and start putting things on d3. But queen d6, which as I said is not a good move. Knight d2. And another weird move, queen f8. I don't even know what to say about this one. I wanted to put pressure on d3 with my rooks. Wanted to get my knight away and put it on d5. But I was completely ignoring what he is doing. So queen d6, queen f8 is what gave him the advantage in this position. It's just a waste of time, sort of unnecessary queen maneuvers which don't do anything. I'm struggling to remember the deeper idea behind these moves, to be honest. When I turned on the engine, it says those moves are just crap, they make no sense, and I was wasting too much time. I had some idea, but I really... under the influence of analysis, when I found actually good moves, I struggled to find the ideas behind my bad moves. Okay, he continued knight c4, bishop d5. I wanted to trade off the light squared bishops, bishop h3. Now this is a different story because the knight is not on f3. I don't want to take on c4 because I need my light squared bishop, but it was an option I was considering actually. So takes, and b5, trying to block things up. The problem is that he's always going to have an annoying edge after c5 and the bishop coming back. And I'm always going to have a target. More importantly, the rook will be able to come to d6 and destroy me. So this really wasn't an option. So I moved the queen again. Queen e7, I have to defend e5 some more, because more attack could come. He could take my knight on d7, and then rook takes d7 and the pawn drops, so I had to defend. Knight e3 attacks my bishop, the bishop drops back, he declines the trade, and now knight b6. I want to go knight d5, trade off his knight on e3. Bishop d2, declining the trade in advance, rook a c8, a4. b5 is coming. Knight d5, knight c4, again declining the trade, rook d7, queen d1. And in this position, maybe I could have played queen d8, just doubling up on the d-pawn and preventing, well, defending my rook on c8, more importantly, to make sure that this isn't too scary. Any knight jumps, for example, any knight jumps are not too scary. Instead I went rook dc7. Again, I'm changing my mind several times because I wasn't really sure what to do. He went a5, he knows what to do. Now it's too late. Now the queenside attack has happened, and playing a6 will give him the b6 square. So for example, a6, bishop d5, takes, knight b6. Would give him a very strong knight on b6. I would have to trade everything off. So for example, like this. And yeah, my bishop pair I think should be worse than his knight. The pawn is not hanging, so I think this would have been very good for white. Instead I went rook d7. I'm again struggling to explain the passivity of my moves, but yeah, okay, b5. And now I need to trade that off. cb5 was simply the best option, even though it gives him a huge attack on the queen side. Rook b5, a6, the rook drops back to b3, and there are problems here. Probably queen d8, back to d8, attacking here and supporting my rook. Instead, I played c5, trying to block things up, but now b6, and I have to play a6. He plays queen a4, attacking my rook. And here maybe I could have stayed in the game with some precise moves. I used the engine for this because I was really struggling to find what to do in my analysis. So the engine wants to play h5, and after h4 it wants to play g6 to put the king on g7. After knight e3, bishop e3, it actually plays king to g7 and says that this is okay. b7 is sufficiently defended, c5 is sufficiently defended. I don't really know what the purpose of these two moves, these three moves is. I don't know how that influences what's going on in the center or on the queen side, but those are the engine moves. It still says white is better, but black should be able to hold. Instead I played queen e8. I wanted to trade the queens off. He played rook c2. I played knight e7, and this is now a tactical blunder, which neither me nor him spotted. He can simply take on b7, which I actually calculated. You have to be aware of bishop takes b7 at all points, and I did see it, I did look at it, and I concluded that it was bad for white. I'm sure he calculated it as well and concluded the same thing. It's not really easy to see why bishop b7 works. So here, bishop b7, rook b7. Queen e8, rook e8, knight d6, fine, I saw all of this. Here, knight b7, rook b7, and rook c5. And I thought, okay, I mean, what's the big deal? I can play king h7. If he plays rook c7, I trade, and then the c8 square is covered by the knight and by the bishop. Both the knight and the bishop are defended. But the engine says this is +5. So what do I know? And what does he know? Instead, he played bishop c3, and now, after my next move, I'm lost. What I need to do here is probably knight c6, and after knight e3, something like queen d8, and try and hold. And this, in fact, should be equal. Even though I have way more weaknesses, I can play bishop e7 at some point, maybe f6, and maybe I'm holding. The point is I'm not allowing bishop b7 stuff. Instead, I played bishop c4, queen c4, and I just didn't see that my exchange was hanging. Not that that saves me. This position should be lost anyway. I played knight c6 and he simply played bishop to h3, and I'm losing the exchange. And of course, this is over now. Played rook d8, takes. I'm not sure about queen c5. I don't think it can be taken because of knight d4. I win the exchange back, even though it would still be better for white. Rook d1, bishop e7, e3, and from here on I just wanted to play for tricks. Obviously I'm playing a 2400 player. There's no way I'm getting out of this unless he blunders either in time trouble or I find some weird trick. Bishop d6, king g2, queen e7, supporting c5, also looking at the king side, queen g4, rook f8, I'm gonna play f5, queen f5, preventing f5, g6, preparing f5, queen e4, king h7 first. I don't want to run into checks on c4, f4, f5, the queen moves away, rook d8. I mean, I have no chance, but playing for tricks is the only thing I have. Queen c4, g5, I'm trying to open up the position, brute force, fe, knight e, attacks the queen, bishop e, queen e, queen f7 check, king h8, queen takes b7, g4, d4, queen e3, and you know, maybe a lesser player would make a mistake here. He plays dc5, attacking the bishop and attacking my rook. I had it all planned out. Queen b3 attacks the rook. He doesn't have time to take on d6, so rook cd2. and now f4. And okay, I lose all of my pieces, but maybe after f3 and king h1 and f2, he hangs mate. He didn't hang mate, unfortunately. So, of course, if he plays something strange, I have queen f3, but yeah, in this position I played rook takes d6. If he takes my rook, I play queen f3, checkmate, but he didn't. He played queen takes b3, and that was the end of the game. What do you say about a game like this? I mean, I think this was way over my head. I remember discussing the game with Milan after we finished, and he said, well, this was very complicated. I had no idea what was going on. And I mean, I felt like that throughout the middle game. This was just so messy. There was so much going on. I was better than he was better. Then it was equal, then he was better. Then it was equal, then he was better. There was so much going on. Anyway, I need to go through this game 5 more times because patterns in this one I did not know. I played e5 because I thought it was a good idea. But playing e5 got me out of my comfort zone. I like playing with a pawn on e6. I feel safe with a pawn on e6. This was round 7. Hope you got something from this one. Let me know what you think. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.